Jessir, the Prince of Many Faces, was sweating profusely. He despised everything about his current situation. He despised the massive, tasteless hall his master chose as his throne room. He despised the horrendously uncomfortable iron chair he was forced to sit on. He despised the way the air managed to somehow feel both too humid and too dry, too hot and too frosty. He despised the pathetic simpering noises his master's consorts and concubines made with each cruel pull of the chains the master held in his massive, gnarled fists. He despised the fact that it was not his hands to hold the chains. Most of all, he despised his master, the all-powerful Crimson Monarch. The Prince of Many Faces was a proud god, once the ruler of 24 worlds, his to dominate and to do all he desired with. Then came the Crimson Monarch, and then came his countless legions. His worlds were conquered. This was not the reason he so hated his master. The prince was wiser than many of his fellows. He realized from the start that no good would come from resisting such power. So he relented, made the conquest easy and relatively bloodless. And he had made himself useful, very useful indeed. With time, he rose to a position unrivaled by any guard in the monarch's court. Though he lost his 12 worlds, hundreds were now open to him. Though his power was no longer absolute, as the monarch's right-hand man, he could have any pleasure he desired, and could inflict any sort of pain on any being he wished. The Crimson Monarch could be a generous lord. And yet, the Prince of Many Faces despised his master for forcing him to be here today.
He will be here soon.
His master's voice was like the chittering of 1 billion infinitesimal insects, shifting and swirling and constantly moving. It was neither high nor low, nor cacophonous nor methodical. It simply was.
Are you certain, my king? He might not come this year.
The prince offered weakly.
He comes always. He shall be here. Your might grows with each passing moment, Great One. Surely, even he has learned to fear you by now. He would be a fool not to.
His master made no reply to that. His massive form dominated the hall, dwarfing the prince's own usually imposing figure into insignificance. And yet, the usual all-conquering arrogance was gone from the master's voice, to be replaced with something different. The prince did not dare contemplate what that something was. Such thoughts were high treason. They continued to wait. With each passing minute, the prince watched his master and could feel his own dread intensifying. Why did the monarch insist he be here? What possible purpose was there to subject him to such? Has he not been loyal? Or at least as loyal as the likes of him were expected to be? Had he not? A shadow fell on the pale, giant bone floor of the great hall. The prince saw his master shift restlessly in his throne, gnarled, chitinous hands gripping slave chains tighter and tighter. The naked men, women, and others at the other end twisted in agony. But the monarch paid them no heed, His gaze was focused only on the shifting shadow, which grew longer with each passing moment. Then,
insect.
The prince instinctively recoiled in his seat. Where there was only shadow moments earlier stood a figure. Its legs were as wide and tall as men, as great trees, as towers. Its hands were gloved in silk, in mail, in empty vacuum. It wore a robe of purest ivory, a deepest azure of dusky flesh. Its shoulders were shrouded in mist, somehow disappearing into the darkness of the hall ceiling, though clearly it could not be that tall.
All death, you come once more.
The prince had to grudgingly admire the calmness in his master's voice. He did not think he could muster the same. The Crimson Monarch rose from his throne, his magnificent and terrifying figure unfolding into its full glory. The prince was surprised to see how unimpressive it suddenly appeared.
It is the day. Today, Arak, son of the third brood, is the day of your birth.
The monarch's true name. He dared speak it. So the rumors were true. For a moment, the monarch's visage was lit with fury. Then he mastered himself and spoke once more, calmly.
Today, all death, is the day of my birth. Today is the day I begin my ascension. The day of your birth, the day you took your first victims. Your brood brothers still scream for you in my halls. They shall scream far more loudly when your halls are mine. I shall make sure of it.
From the mist-shrouded ceiling came an awful sound. Merry laughter, as light and guileless as a child's, filled with joy.
Burrow in your dirt, you eat the other tiny creatures that live in it, and think yourself the master of all creation.
His master visibly bristled at that. With a sudden yank, he pulled at his slave chains savagely, bringing one of his screaming consorts to his feet. The monarch grabbed the helpless man with one enormous fist and effortlessly smashed his throat. The man had no time to scream.
Earthworm, you say? How droll. See how easily I master your domain. See with what grace I deliver more and many into your dank halls.
For a time, the figure did not move. The master dropped the consul's lifeless body to the floor, where he was gathered by his weeping fellows. The prince said nothing, looked at nothing. He only wished to be away from here, back at his games, back at...
Indeed, Arak, son of the third brood. No other has delivered so many into my halls. Such I shall give you. You have filled them to the bursting.
His master seemed to straighten at that, as if the old death was his own master, and he but an apprentice, awaiting praise. It was an odd sight.
Consider this, when the day comes, you to join them. For me to take you to them.
Just as fast, his master deflated, all strength seemingly leaving his body. The prince has never before seen him thus.
This is my gift to you, on the day of your birth, insect. I bid you contemplate on Till next year.
And the figure was gone. The prince gaped at the empty space it was in only moments ago, and then at his master, who sunk back to his throne like a dying man. He was actually shivering by creation. Why did he want the prince to witness all this? What was the point of it all? The Crimson Monarch let out a soft breath and turned his gaze to the prince.
I did it so you remember. Conspire against me, and all shall be yours. My worlds, my servants, my power, the fear of all creation, dominion over all. And this